Aloha and welcome to the Nisei Veterans Memorial Center's The Nisei Narrative, where we take a more personal and in-depth look into the stories of the Japanese American pre, during, and post-World War II. Good afternoon. My name is Deidre Teagarden. I'm the Executive Director here at the Nisei Veterans Memorial Center on Maui, where our mission is to inspire people to find the hero within themselves through the legacy of our Nisei veterans. And if you're interested in finding out more information about our center, you can do that on the web at nvmc.org. We're so delighted to have all of you join us today for this talk story with ABC Store's President and CEO, Mr. Paul Kosasa. And to our friends in Japan, we just want to say honjitsu wa o isogashii naka go sanka kudasari makoto ni arigatou gozaimasu. Now, before I introduce our speaker, just a few housekeeping items for those of you who are new to our programming. We love to take questions. So feel free to type your questions in that little question and answer box at the bottom left of your screen. Type them in as they come to you, and we will get to as many as time allows. This is being recorded and will be available on our Nisei Veterans Memorial Center YouTube channel in about a week. So we invite you to go there and rewatch this talk and check out some of the others you may have missed. And of course, we couldn't do what we do without the incredible support of our corporate sponsors. You saw their logos as you were getting on the Zoom call today. So please help me in mahaloing all of them. Now, without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to introduce today's speaker. Founded by Sydney and Minnie Kosasa, the ABC stores had their start back in the 1930s. The president and CEO of ABC Stores, Paul Kosasa, is responsible for the general operations of the company, which includes 78 stores across Hawaii, Guam, Saipan, and Las Vegas, as well as 2 restaurants. Paul Kosasa has been with the ABC stores for 40 years and is president of the Kosasa Foundation. He is the youngest of 4 children. Paul is a graduate of the University of Michigan with a BS in electrical engineering and Iolani School in Honolulu, Hawaii. Paul Kosasa serves as the chair for the Hawaii Symphony Orchestra, the Waikiki Business Improvement District Association, and he has been a director with Central Pacific Bank since 1994. He serves on numerous nonprofit boards and is the recipient of the Retailer of the Year Award in 2003 and 2009, Pacific Business News's 50 Most Influential Businesses, and the Kosasa Family Foundation was recipient of the Outstanding Philanthropist Award in 2013. There's so much more I could read on his bio. We're so thrilled he is with us today. Please help me welcome Mr. Paul Kosasa.
Hi,
hello.
You.
Thank you so much.
Introduction.
Thank you so much for being with us today. And I love the fact that your background is your family. And I thought that that would be a great place to start, is having you just give us a little bit more information. I mean, everybody knows the ABC stores, but I don't know if everybody knows the background, and who better to share it than you. Could you, start us off with that?
Well, I'm in our boardroom, and in our boardroom we have photos of those that came before me. It's my grandparents and my dad over here. And so, yeah, we can start at the beginning. My grandfather immigrated from Okayama, Japan, and came to Hawaii as a plantation worker. So he worked in the sugarcane fields. And this was, my sister probably has the better dates than I do, but it's probably like early 1900. And he worked in the plantation fields for a few years, I think, and then went back to Japan to marry my grandmother. In those days, they had the concept of omiyai, which is arranged marriages. and he went back to Okayama to marry my grandmother. A bit of a story. My grandma told me that when she first met my grandfather, because he was so dark from the sun, working in the fields, she didn't like him because he was too dark. But you got to get married. So they got married and then came back to Honolulu, where my dates aren't going to be real good, but this is still early 1900s. They settled in Palolo Valley. My grandfather was quite the person. He was a very skilled carpenter, and an extremely hard worker, very resourceful, and he built the first store, the M. Kosasa butcher and grocery and butcher.
I think we have a picture of that too.
And that's on 10th Avenue in Kaimiki. Back in those days, it was just dirt roads, a very sparsely populated community back then. And my grandmother was fairly well educated. She learned English extremely quickly, picked up the language very well, and then worked to teach Japanese to, or maybe it was English to the Japanese immigrant population. So she was kind of like the school teacher there. And my grandfather, being the merchant, set up that store and served a community back in call it post World War I, so in 1967.
So that whole idea of service and giving back to the community really started with your grandparents.
Yeah, and it was fairly common, I think, for many Japanese immigrants settling in Hawaii to become merchants. And for our story, it just happened to be in Palolo Valley. My father, Sidney, and my uncle, Neil, were born on the second floor of that store. And they basically grew up in the grocery store business. They had to work in the store when they were of age. And my dad would, in those days, groceries were delivered, just like today. It's so strange to hear that.
We've come full circle.
Yeah, they didn't have internet back then, but what my dad would do is that he would have a notepad and he'd go through all the homes in the area and take their orders, rice, shoyu, meats, and those kinds of things. And then he would come back to the store, they would assemble, then they would deliver it to the resident in Palolo. Like I said, back then it was not as well, was not popular that, so it was still kind of rural.
Right. So your uncle and your father. I know you sent in a photograph of your uncle. We'll show it here in a minute. But so fast forward, they grew up, and your father wanted to stay in that business. I think he went to school for pharmacy, correct?
That's correct. So my grandmother was actually the business person in the family. So she recommended to my father that the grocery store business is a very low margin business, and if you wanted to make better profit, the drugstore business is a better business. And if you were to take up pharmacy as a profession, then you can make more money. And so he heeded that advice. My uncle went to UC Berkeley, and my uncle was 2 years older, and so my father followed my uncle to because it's just better to be close to family if you're on the mainland. So he followed my uncle and took up pharmacy. Initially, though, my dad didn't have enough credits, so he went to junior college in Sacramento first for the first year, and then enrolled in the UC. It's Berkeley, but it was actually located in San Francisco. In fact, the medical, dental, and pharmacies were, I think, all located in San Francisco. And that is probably 1938, 1939. And he was in school, of which in 1941, December 7th, as we all know, the Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor. He was still in San Francisco at the time. And there's no way to get passage back to Hawaii because everything just locked down. So he, so they were evacuating San Francisco. He managed to get to Sacramento, where he had boarded with my mom's family. They weren't married at the time, but they were. There's some place he could go, and that was to actually try to delay going into camp, because as they were rounding up by locations, he would keep moving to delay his evacuation. But at the same time, he was, I think, still going to school. And he was in his last year of pharmacy school. And fortunately, the dean of the pharmacy told all the Japanese Americans that if they, at least in his class, if they took the exam early and passed, they would get their degree. And that's what he did, and he passed. It was different for other schools. Other schools wouldn't allow the Japanese Americans to take exams and get their degrees, and they would, have to go back eventually. But in his case, he was very fortunate to be able to take the exam and get his degree. And they mailed his diploma to Tule Lake. Right.
So your father and your mother's family were interned at Tule Lake. How long were they there?
They were there for maybe about a year, because his objective and my mom's family's objective was to try to not stay in camp.
Right.
And so my dad said the way to get out of camp, or to be released out of camp, was get a job. That's a photo of my parents. They actually were married.
So they were married in Tule Lake, and this is a photograph from that time. But at the same time, your uncle was decided to go enlist, and he was with the 442nd, correct?
That's correct. And so he was both sons were away from Hawaii. He was he served in Europe, and my dad was in the camp. So it's sort of this interesting juxtaposition, one
It is.
and one serving the U.S. military.
So getting back to what you said before I interrupted you, you were saying that your father said the only way to get out of camp was to work. So can you expand on that?
So he wrote letters to according to his history, hospitals on the East Coast and the Midwest, to be a pharmacist in these hospitals, like 50 of them. Only 2 offered him a job, and one was in Chicago, and one was in St. Louis, Missouri, which is Barnes Hospital. That's the job he took, and the reason he took that is because he had friends at Washington University that he could stay with, and so he accepted the job and then moved to St. Louis. And then now I don't think many moved with him. I think he initially went and then managed to get the rest of the family members to. He wrote back to camp and said, "Hey, you know what? St. Louis it's kind of a friendlier place for Japanese Americans, and you can probably get work." And so they managed to get out of camp too, and then moved to St. Louis, where my dad.
So how long was he in, or how long was the family in St. Louis before they came back to Hawaii? And did they immediately go into the family business?
Yeah, I'm looking at some notes here. I'm guessing maybe about 3 years. It says in my note that in 1944, they returned to Hawaii. There's a lot of information in between this, because I think my father went first and many followed later, and there's all kinds of things that in between. But my dad worked for a company called Benson Smith here in Honolulu. They're the largest drugstore chain, as a pharmacist, and then eventually he got promoted to be a store manager at Benson's. Then eventually he wanted to open his own business, and then open the kind of pharmacy. You have the picture there.
Yes.
In 49. And that was on the property that my grandparents had acquired. So over the years, my grandparents had acquired real estate slowly, and because back Honolulu was kind of still rural and land relative. They're all, who'd want that? But I think they acquired others.
So they opened that, and then I mean, gosh, they must have made a lot of sacrifices and a lot of hard work. And I want to talk about that in a little bit. But when did they decide to to take it into that convenience store type model? And why the name ABC? Does that stand for something?
Yeah. Well, let me share a story about this. I kind of had to do some review, listening to old tape of my dad talking. When he was at Barnes Hospital, there was a professor there at I guess the Washington University, or the teaching hospital, that knew a local doctor here in Honolulu. That's Dr. Sakimoto, which incidentally he delivered my brother, and he delivered our family. All of us were, I think, were delivered by him. And Dr. Sakimoto had, when he moved back to Honolulu, he set up a medical building called the Medical Arts. And when my dad first got started in opening the pharmacies, he contacted Dr. Sakimoto, which had the relationship with the Barnes Hospital, to see if he can open a location, a pharmacy in his medical arts building. There's King Street and Victoria. And so my dad's, in his expansion plans, opened the Kaimiki store, then he opened the medical arts store, Cam Shopping Center, started opening like 8 pharmacies around town. And to get the buying power, because there's a lot of competition, he joined they call it the National Association of Chain Drugstores. It's a mainland, trade organization, and they had a convention in Miami Beach. It was the early '60s, and so my parents went to the convention, and they looked around, and my dad told my mom, one day Waikiki may end up looking like Miami, so we should look for some locations. So when they got back, they went to look for some locations in Waikiki, and their first store was a 700 square foot tiny store, just 2 aisles, only carrying drugs and cosmetics. And they opened that store. And apparently it was, making money. But back in those days, there was only 3 hotels, Royal Hawaiian, Moana, and Halekulani. But as time went on and the jet planes started, more jets started flying in, more hotels started coming up, he was still looking for locations. And it's interesting that there's, merchants that were close to retirement age. And so they asked my dad, "Oh, why don't you take over my business?" And he said, "Sure." So that's how he kind of started opening more and more ABC stores. And then as customers turned into tourists, they were looking for suntan lotion, for souvenirs, T-shirts, for liquor, tobacco. So he brought all those things in, assembled it all into a store, and then it became the ABC store.
Okay, so why ABC? Was it
easy to remember?
They remember. I love that.
Yeah. So there, even in those days, there were a few foreign tourists, and there were Japanese tourists, and he understood that if he had a Hawaiian name, it's too hard for them to remember. So he just tried to pick something that was easy and when you open the phone book in those days, you'd be at the top. So
that's right. It would be right up at the top. So as you were growing up and as your parents started the business, was there ever a lot of talk about either their time in camp, or maybe just the values that they instilled in you and your siblings that they felt were important to pass on to you?
When the camp stuff was never shared, at least to me. I don't recall any time where they talked about camp, except when we would have family reunions. So my mom's family still lived in California. And as we got older, we would organize family reunions. And it's during those reunions that they started sharing, reminiscing about the camp. And that's where I kind of learned about camp life. And it was actually kind of interesting. I mean, it was terrible, but interesting. And I can give you some examples. So when my dad went to Tule Lake, because he was had a degree in pharmacy, he would work in the medical barracks, I guess. But when he arrived there, the medical barracks were still under construction. So the barracks where they stayed in only had a cot, and that was it. But his friend was a good carpenter, so they would take the lumber from the construction of the medical barracks, and he would build furniture. He'd build beds, he'd build tables, chairs, all kinds of things. And so he said they were kind of more furnished than the other barracks, which was fortunate. And then on their wedding, they had the reception at the cafeteria, and my dad was responsible for cooking a chicken, but he didn't have the heart to break the neck, right? So he used ether, because he's a pharmacist, which stays in the chicken, right? So after you cook it, the smell just comes out. So they couldn't eat the chicken because it was too much ether smell. But those are some of the stories they would share, and I'm just kind of eavesdropping, listening to all that. They're all laughing about it. I mean, they laughed about it at the time. Probably they made the best out of camp life, as hard as it was.
Yeah. Well, I've never heard a story like that. Never heard. So that's a first. But I mean, all joking aside, to even be able to reminisce about such a difficult time, just we have no idea, no concept of what that is like. But thank you for sharing those stories. So you grew up in the family, you grew up in this business, but you decided to study electrical engineering in university. So how did you always know that you wanted to be in the business, or why electrical engineering? How did you become the CEO of the ABC stores?
I didn't know whether I was gonna be in the business. In high school, I always was interested in electronics, and thought that maybe that would be an interesting career, to engineering career. And again, my grandmother, she would kind of nudge me and saying, "Oh, engineering is good. Engineering is good." So I wasn't sure. So when I attended the University of Michigan, I would take a variety of courses, and the electrical engineering was interesting. So I started taking those courses. But upon graduation, since I kind of grew up in the company, so I'd work after school in the stores. There's always something about having to keep the legacy of the family business going, and so I did work in California for a little while in retail, in the grocery retail. And one evening, I got a call from my dad saying one of his key managers was really sick. He needed my help. Come back. So I came back and started working as a trainee. And I think I'm drawn to the fact that a lot of the employees when I came back, they could see that the future of the company would still be there if I stuck with it. And so somehow the employees would encourage me to, keep working for the company. It's a good company. Your parents are such good people. They take care of us, and hopefully one day you might do the same. And I kind of felt pressure, but it's not. I would have to give the credit to our employees. I mean, these old timer employees that said, "Hey, this is a good family business. You should take over." And I think that's kind of what convinced me to do the business. So that's kind of the short of it.
Well, I saw a couple of talks that you did, I think for UH, and whenever you talk about the employees, you can tell that they are family to you. And one of the really interesting things about the ABC stores is that you don't have a mission statement. Is that
That's
still correct? So why is that?
That's still true today. Well, I have this thinking that if I ask a cashier, what do you think the mission statement is for the company? Whatever he or she says, that's probably what in their mind the mission statement is. So I thought I would experiment, and I did that. I asked the cashier one day that, what do you think the mission statement is? Because we don't have a mission statement. And she said, well, I think it's, if you take care of the customers will take care of you. And I think, well, I couldn't even think of a mission statement better than that. So that's why we don't have a mission statement, because it's, you can't shove it down people's throats, whatever the mission statement is. It's whatever they feel it is. And so far, we've been pretty successful with not having customers. Plus,
I would say so. With 78 stores and 2 restaurants and the Island Gourmet Market, of which we are huge fans of, and we love it. Love all the ABC stores. So, you were built on the idea of visitors, both locals and visitors, but then I think maybe visitors became a big part of your business. You saw the Japanese bubble burst in the 80s and 90s. Is there any way you can compare what happened with the bubble bursting to what has happened with business during COVID?
Well, there's nothing that compares to COVID. It's probably the worst ever happened. In the 90s, when the Japanese bubble was, getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and they were coming into Hawaii in droves and spending a lot of money and buying all kinds of things. It was a good time for us. It was a good time for us for our expansion too, and that's when we expanded to Guam and Saipan, because a lot of Japanese were traveling over there. And then the bubble burst, and even with the U.S. economy, had softened up, but we retrenched it. It always came back. Even after the Gulf War, it was pretty devastating. It lasted 9/11, and the recession back in 2009. Those are only this one is unheard of. Because last long. It's still not.
How have you been able to pivot? I know you had told me earlier you had to furlough employees, but you've kept business going. You've kept people employed. Um, how were you able to do that?
Well, that comes. I give credit to Sydney and Minnie on that one. Growing up in the business, they taught me to always save money. I know it sounds a little cliche-ish, I guess, but they said that you'll never know what bad thing can happen. You're gonna need reserves to carry you through the bad times, and and we took it to heart. So we just kept saving money, profits, and when COVID hit, philosophically we take care of our employees first. So although we couldn't give them hours because there's no customers, we kept their health care benefits intact. They were still employees, but they weren't getting hours. We would help them with unemployment insurance, and we still had to pay rents to our landlords. And so those reserves, we had to dip into our reserves. And yeah, it's pretty horrific actually, but it wasn't insurmountable. And so that's how we survived 2020. Yeah, well, and
Yeah.
it's coming back now.
It's good. And we had someone just write in a second ago saying they go every morning to the ABC store in Kihei to get their coffee and newspaper, and it's always a great experience. And even during COVID, the service was excellent, and they appreciate that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's tough. I mean, we're not perfect either, so we try to emphasize to our employees that our customers got to have good customer service. And my dad drilled that into me too, that you got to take care of the customer, you got to take care of the and so although sometimes we fail in some respects, but we always try to bounce back and make sure our service levels are good.
So another thing I really wanted to ask you about was your dress code. So as I understand it, you were always wearing a tie, and the managers at your stores, the male managers at your stores, also wear ties. And I just wanted to ask you about that.
Well, they can't hide. Yeah, that originates from my dad too, and he was always felt that retail was a noble profession, or pharmacies, and that it was equal to any other profession, whether it's law or medical. And so he emphasized that we have to look professional at all times. And if you look professional, then the odds are you'll behave professionally. And customers know who works at the store. They'll look for the tie. And so that even our stock clerks at one point in time had to wear ties, but we couldn't hire, people would quit because they'd have to wear a tie, so we had to change a little bit. But our management, we still stick to wearing a tie. Probably one of the very few merchants that.
You don't see ties as much as you used to, and it's always nice to go into the store and and see someone with a tie, and yeah, you're right, you know automatically that that person is of authority, and you can go talk to them. So.
And plus, I'm reminded over here, you know.
You are in all those photos behind you. So I want to talk a little bit about convenience stores, Japan versus and America. You know, the Japanese convenience store, you can do everything there, including, you know, pay your electric bills. But I feel like whenever I go into the one in Wailea, I feel like I've kind of stepped into Japan. I mean, there's such a selection of food, and there's a wonderful seating area. You can get everything there. But I know you go to Japan as well, and talk to us about that Japanese convenience store, American convenience store. Is there anything that you have brought home to the ABC stores from that concept of a Japanese convenience store?
Yeah, a little bit. The Japanese, the 7-Elevens and the Lawsons and the Family Marts, I mean, they're masters at logistics and distribution. You know, in Japan, because they don't have very large refrigerators, and you know, they go shopping more frequently, and the convenience stores in Japan are actually their refrigerator. You know, so they would go and pick up all these things and they're fresh, they're made daily, and because of that, the way their lifestyle is, you know, it worked extremely well. That's why you have so many convenience stores in Japan, and they're in all the good locations too. American convenience stores are a little bit different. They originated more for to fill up gas, and then, you know, since you're there, you might as well pick up some snacks and those kinds of things. And it's evolved since then, because now American convenience stores they have delicatessens and offering pretty good foods, packaged foods. And 7-Eleven is a great example of that. For us, it's, you know, because we're catering to tourists, we have to manage our merchandising to the visitor. So that's why we carry like masks and snorkels and you know, things to that tourists would like to have fun with, and memorabilia to take back to remember their vacation, but also to make it a one-stop shop. So as we got more into the food business, we wanted to raise our standards up even higher, so we can offer like 10-ounce prime ribs and steak and shrimps and sushi and ramen, and it's really good.
Yeah, and you even have a butcher on staff at the one.
Yeah, Dave.
In Wailea.
Yeah, he's a great butcher, by the way. I mean, and so fresh meat. It's not, and the store that you go to is an exception. We have 2 stores that have service meat counters, but it's small enough where it's very easy to navigate, because, you know, the American stores, particularly on the mainland, they're so big. You know, you have to go over aisles after aisles after aisles. We strip it down to just carry just the essential products, and so I think that's what makes it more comfortable. You can get in, get out.
Yeah, very true. Well, thank you for sharing that. I just, like I said, we're big fans of the store. You know, kind of pivoting a little bit toward philanthropy. You know, oftentimes big business will get a bad rap, and yet if it weren't for big business, a lot of nonprofits wouldn't be able to get the grant funding and all of the other services that come to nonprofits. thanks to the big business. So I think you had said, again, in that UH talk that you did, business is a good thing. And at the same time, it's important as that business to give back to the community. And just thought you could talk a little bit about why philanthropy is important to you and to your family, and what it means to the community.
Sure, and again, that's being taught to us from my grandparents, starting from my grandparents, because they they were very generous people. They helped establish. Well, my dad and uncle, spent a lot of time at the YMCA, and so as an example, they donated land to the YMCA, which helped them grow and sustain. And so those are examples of their philanthropy in a effective way, which then passed on to my parents and passed on to us. As businesses, there's one part of the employees that we take care of, but we also, especially locally here, we want to make the world a better place. And so it's not just taking money all the time. It's being able to share that money in good ways, particularly for our future generations. And so you want to leave the place better than when you found it. And so our values really have been to try to improve everything we can as far as our society, our community. And there are so many nonprofits that are in so much need. We have limited resources. One of the hardest jobs is to pick between competing good things, right? And that's probably the hardest part about working in our foundation. In the old days, when we first started our foundation, we were very, very small. So we would just kind of give to the conventional organizations. And that would be done. Well, we still do it today, where we just we sit around a table. My brother and my two sisters, we would decide, how to allocate our giving. And so we've been doing it for like, I don't know, 20 years, I guess, or 30 years maybe. And so, but it's important to us. One of the because a lot of our employees come from communities that are underserved, and so and these are employees that help our business. So it's our obligation to support and to help them survive.
Someone just actually texted in and wants to know, do you feel that being a successful leader also gives you that responsibility, or puts that responsibility on you to be a good community leader? And can you truly be one without the other?
You can be one without the other, but I think since I happen to be the face of the company, and reputation is very important to me. Having a good reputation, that I participate in all the ways that I can to make this world a better place. I have a saying, I don't use it too often, but when I'm dealing with, say, with an employee that's maybe not performing as well, I think of their parents. And so I think of what would I tell their parents if I did everything possible to help their child succeed. And so I kind of think that way for a lot of other things. What would I say to the parents? And that sort of guides me in what I do and how I do it. And so hopefully it serves me well.
I think that I think that kind of answers the other question that came in, which is, what is the secret to being a good leader?
A secret to being a good leader. I don't know the answer to that. I think because everybody's different. Everybody has different priorities. I've had the good fortune to be with the Hawaii Community Foundation for 20 years. That's another philanthropic organization that gives grants in the neighborhood.
They're very generous.
I've met a lot of people, a lot of nonprofits from all the islands, and they tell me their stories, both successes and failures, and I've learned a lot. I've learned that doing the right thing is not the easiest thing to do, and to be sensitive to other cultures, other races, other ethnicities, and put myself in their shoes, and then try to understand their perspective, and try to help have a good, healthy dialogue. Not easy, but I try.
We have two more questions that came in. The first is, what did your father's brother survive World War II in the 442nd? Did he come home?
Yes, he did come home. Yeah, and he was close to Senator Inouye too. Unfortunately, my uncle had died of cancer at an earlier age than my dad. In his 50s, I think my uncle passed away. So his life was cut short. But yeah, that was unfortunate. But he served the country.
Yep. This question is about the Hawaii Symphony. How do you see the Hawaii Symphony doing these days? Do you see it perhaps changing long term?
Yeah, it may change a little bit. The symphony during this COVID time was a rough period, of course. Actually, it seems like always for the orchestra. But our executive director Dave Moss and musicians, very resilient, and I think it'll get better and better. We are able to attract another generation of entrepreneurs. We're going to change. We'll probably change up a few things as far as our repertoire, but the musicians are, they're amazing group of people. They're teachers, they're educators. They provide a lot of besides entertainers, provide a lot for our community. And a city our size should have an orchestra. And to our credit, there are several orchestras that failed during this COVID period, but we survived. And so we're back in business, even though it's only 200 patrons a night. But if you go to our website, So
All right, you broke up a little bit.
yeah.
So what's the, I said you broke up a little bit. If you wanted to give that pitch for Hawaii Symphony Orchestra again.
I think the website is myhso.org. And they'll list the concerts, the Starlight series. Shout out to Sheraton, who's our title sponsor for that. And I'm so grateful for all the donors and the sponsors that keep the orchestra playing, and the musicians working. They took sacrifices too. They took some salary cuts, so it's a shared sacrifice.
Well, I think we're also appreciative to those donors and sponsors who come out and have helped during COVID to any of the nonprofits, and it's been a difficult time for everybody. But I know, we're very appreciative for what came our way during COVID, and we certainly couldn't do it without the community's support. I am going to gently end our talk. I can't believe it's almost been an hour, but I'm going to come back to you in just a few minutes for some closing remarks.
Okay.
In the meantime, I want to thank everybody for joining us today and let you know that we have some more good talks coming up in June. On June 11th, we have Wayne Osako. He is with the Stamp Our Story Committee, the group that has worked for the past 15 years on getting the Go for Broke stamp at the United States Postal Service, and that's going to be unveiled early June. So he'll be coming on to talk about the backstory to that. And then on June 19th, which is a Saturday, we have Scott Kikawa coming on to talk about his book, Kona Wins. And that's with An Afternoon with the Author series. Both of these talks you can sign up for on our website at nvmc.org. So we hope you go and do that, or you can always just email us here at the center. I'm going to turn it back to you, Mr. Paul, and thank you so much again for taking your time to share not only about the store and your family, but about leadership and COVID and your philanthropic endeavors as well. So thank you very, very much. But I turn it back to you for some closing words of wisdom.
Oh. I don't forget the people that came before me, particularly my grandparents and my parents. And I try to refresh my memory periodically on the lessons that they've been trying to teach us as the next generation. And hopefully I do a good enough job in teaching my kids the same values and that they taught us, so that we can prosper as a civil society. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And we have about 5 more comments that just came in. Everybody's saying how much your family has meant to them over the years, how loved they feel when they go into the stores, and to thank you and your entire family for everything you've done. So many thanks. Until we meet again, a hui hou, take care, and aloha.
Yep.